The scream didn't come from the child. It came from the father. "What are you doing to him?" The front door was still swinging open when Daniel Cross dropped his keys. They skidded across the marble floor, ringing like an alarm. On the staircase, his 8-year-old son sat hunched over, his small body folded inward like he was trying to disappear. One eye was swollen nearly shut. A dark bruise bloomed across his cheek, and kneeling in front of him was the woman Daniel had hired less than 3 weeks ago. Her hands on the boy's face for a split second. The world went white. "Get away from him," Daniel shouted, his voice cracking with something close to panic. Right now, the woman froze. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her hands and stood. The boy flinched as if the air itself had struck him. "Eli, come here," Daniel ordered. The hesitation was barely a breath long, but Daniel felt it like a knife. His son didn't move immediately. His eyes stayed locked on the woman's hands, as if waiting for permission. When he finally slid off the step and crossed the distance, Daniel pulled him hard against his chest, one arm wrapped tight, the other already searching for injuries. "Did she do this to you?" Daniel demanded. Eli shook his head. "No, she was helping. Double quotes, helping. Daniel looked up, his stare burning. "Helping with what? My son is bruised and you had your hands all over him." The woman swallowed. Her voice was steady, but her fingers trembled at her sides. "If you just let me explain." "Explain?" Daniel snapped. "You don't touch my child without my permission. She was teaching me," Eli whispered. "How to talk." Daniel looked down. "Talk to who?" "To Mateo," Eli said. "He can't hear." The room went quiet, thick with confusion. Daniel loosened his grip just enough to look at his son's face. The bruises weren't fresh. They were days old, yellow at the edges. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Someone at school did this?" Daniel asked. Eli nodded. "Mateo pushed me. He didn't mean to. He was mad because nobody understands him." Daniel's head snapped up. "And you knew?" He asked the woman. She lifted her chin. "He asked me not to tell you. That is not your decision to make." "I know," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry." She turned and walked away, footsteps soft against the floor. Leaving Daniel standing there with a child he suddenly realized he did not know at all. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, replaying the scene over and over. The way his son had watched that woman, the way he hadn't screamed, the way he hadn't been afraid of her at all. He hadn't been afraid of her. He'd been afraid of losing her. Daniel found her in the small room off the laundry, folding clothes into a suitcase. "I owe you an apology," Daniel said. She didn't look up. "You don't. I accused you of hurting my son. You were protecting him." "No," Daniel said softly. "I was protecting myself." She paused, hands resting on a folded sweater. "My brother was deaf," she said after a moment. "People treated him like he was broken. When your son asked me to teach him how to talk to another boy like him, I couldn't say no." Daniel closed his eyes. Shame burned hot and deep. The phone rang before he could speak. Ellie's school. An incident. A meeting first thing in the morning. Daniel didn't sleep. The next day unraveled everything he thought he understood about his world. The school wasn't worried about Eli. They were worried about Mateo, about liability, about disruption, about removing the problem. When Mateo's mother arrived, exhaustion written into every line of her face, Daniel saw something that finally broke through his anger, fear, not of punishment, but of losing the last place willing to tolerate her child. "They want to expel him," she said. "He's 8. Daniel thought of Ellie's bruises, of silent hallways, of a boy screaming without sound. What if someone learned his language? Daniel asked. The room went still. "I'll pay for it," Daniel said. "All of it." And for the first time since his wife died, Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not relief, responsibility. When he left the school, his phone buzzed. A message from the woman he had nearly driven away. "I can't stay. Tell Eli I'll pray for him." Daniel ran. By the time he reached the house, her car was still there. The suitcase waited by the door. "Please don't go," he said, breathless. "Not like this. I can't stay where I'm not trusted," she replied. Before Daniel could answer, the front door burst open and Eli stood there, eyes wide with terror. He saw the suitcase and turned and ran straight into the street. The sound of Brake screaming still echoed in Daniel's ears when he dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms, shaking. "I thought if I left, you wouldn't," Eli sobbed. Something shattered open in Daniel's chest. That was the moment everything changed. The school board meeting was louder than Daniel expected. Parents whispered, argued, avoided eye contact. Mateo sat beside his mother, hands folded, eyes down. Daniel stood when they tried to speak for him. "My son was hurt," he said, "and I wanted someone to blame. But my son wanted someone to understand." He lifted Eli into his arms. Eli signed slowly, clumsily, but with fierce determination. "Friend forever." Mateo's face crumpled. His hands moved back in response, shaking. "Thank you." The vote was unanimous. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the back of a classroom where children laughed with their hands. Eli caught his eye and waved. Mateo waved too. The woman stood beside Daniel, no longer just an employee, no longer invisible. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "God sends help in the form we least expect." Daniel nodded, watching his son belong in a world he had almost failed to see. He had thought saving his child meant control. He learned too late, and just in time, that it meant listening. The boy screamed without making a sound. Daniel noticed at the moment he stepped into the classroom for the first time. After the board meeting, Mateo's mouth was open wide, his small chest heaving, his hands flailing in sharp, frantic movements. But the room was quiet, too quiet. Children stared. One girl pressed her hands over her ears even though there was nothing to hear. The substitute teacher stood frozen near the whiteboard, panic written across her face. Daniel's stomach dropped. Mateo had been triggered by something small, a chair scraping the floor, a sudden change in routine. No one knew which, because no one had ever learned how to ask him. Linda was there within seconds. She didn't rush, she didn't shout, she knelt slowly in front of Mateo, lowering herself until her eyes were level with his. Her hands moved gently, deliberately, cutting through the chaos like calm water. "Breathe. You are safe, I see you." Mateo's wild movements slowed. His eyes locked onto her hands. His breathing steadied, one shaky inhale at a time. The room watched a miracle happen in silence. Daniel felt his throat close. This was what they had almost thrown away. After that day, the school changed in ways Daniel hadn't imagined possible. Teachers stayed late, struggling through sign language charts taped to their desks. Children practiced signs at recess. Instead of tag, laughter followed clumsy fingers and wrong movements, but no one mocked. They corrected each other. They tried again. Eli came home every day bursting with stories, his hands moving faster than his words. Daniel watched his son come alive in a way he hadn't seen since before his wife died. There was purpose in him now, a quiet confidence. Daniel, meanwhile, was learning just how much he had missed. One night, weeks later, he found Eli sitting on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by papers covered in drawings. Not superheroes, not monsters, people, hands, faces. "What's all this?" Daniel asked, sitting beside him. Eli hesitated. "It's for Mateo, when he feels mad. I draw what he might be feeling so he doesn't have to punch the wall." Daniel stared at his son, stunned. "Who taught you that?" Eli shrugged. "Linda said sometimes feelings are loud inside, even if they're quiet outside." Daniel leaned back against the bed, emotion pressing hard against his ribs. His son had learned empathy from the woman he had nearly accused of abuse. The guilt never fully left him. It followed him to work, sat beside him in meetings, whispered to him in quiet moments. He started leaving the office early on Fridays, then Wednesdays, eventually every day. Not because of obligation, because he wanted to be there. Linda noticed before he said anything. She always did. "You're different," she said one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Eli and Mateo were in the living room, building a lopsided tower of blocks, their hands flying between laughter. "I'm trying," Daniel replied. "Trying isn't the same as changing." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm changing." She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, not forgiving, not yet, but acknowledging. The pushback came fast. Other parents complained about time taken away from normal lessons, about resources being wasted on one child. Emails flooded the principal's inbox. Meetings were called. Voices were raised. Daniel sat through everyone. "He's slowing the class down," one father said. Daniel stood. "He's teaching them something you clearly never learned." Silence fell heavy. Mrs. Torres cried the day she told Daniel she'd been offered a night shift. She couldn't refuse. "I won't be able to pick him up," she said, hands shaking. "They'll tell me he's too much again." "He's not going anywhere," Daniel said. "Neither are you." Linda volunteered without being asked. Daniel adjusted his schedule again. Slowly, a small, fragile network formed around a child who had spent his life alone. Mateo changed. The anger didn't vanish, but it softened. He began tapping Ellie's arm instead of pushing when he felt overwhelmed. He learned signs for joke and friend and home. He learned that frustration didn't always mean danger. One afternoon, Daniel arrived early and found Mateo sitting alone, staring at the door. "He's waiting for you," Linda signed gently. Daniel crouched in front of the boy, heart pounding. Slowly, carefully, he signed the words he'd practiced for weeks. "You are safe here." Mateo stared at him. Then he smiled. A small, uncertain smile. But it was real. That night, Daniel cried in his car for a long time before driving home. The past came back for him in pieces. His wife's illness, the hospital rooms, the silence after. He had thought surviving meant shutting down, providing, functioning. He hadn't realized survival without connection was just another kind of loss. Linda sat beside him on the porch one night while the boys slept inside. "You know," she said softly, "grief doesn't disappear, it just changes shape." Daniel nodded. "I built walls, and your son learned how to build bridges anyway." He looked at her then, really looked, the strength, the patience, the quiet courage that had changed. Not just his family, but an entire school. "I don't want to lose this," he said. "Then don't," she replied. "Show up." The next challenge came when the funding renewal was questioned. The board wanted proof, progress reports, numbers. Daniel brought them something else. He brought Mateo. In front of a room full of adults, Mateo stood shaking, hands clenched tight. Eli stood beside him, holding his sleeve. Mateo signed slowly, imperfectly, bravely. "I am not bad. I was lonely. The room broke. No chart could measure that. The funding passed unanimously later. As the building emptied, Mrs. Torres hugged Linda so tightly they both cried. "You saved my son," she whispered. Linda shook her head. "No, he saved himself. We just listened." Daniel watched them, a quiet certainty settling in his chest. He had almost destroyed the very thing that healed them all. And the hardest truth of all was this. Love hadn't arrived loudly in his life. It had arrived kneeling on a staircase, hands moving in silence, asking him to finally see what had been in front of him all along. The day everything almost fell apart again began with a phone call at 6:12 a.m. Daniel answered it half asleep, expecting work. Instead, the voice on the other end was tight, strained, and unfamiliar. "Mr. Cross, this is the district office. There's been a complaint filed against Westridge Preparatory. Serious allegations." Daniel sat upright. "About what?" "About inappropriate conduct involving a non-licensed individual working closely with students." The words hit like ice water. Linda. By the time Daniel hung up, his hands were shaking. He stood in the kitchen staring at nothing. The memory of that first night crashing back into him with brutal clarity. The accusation, his reaction, the damage it had almost caused. Eli came downstairs rubbing his eyes. "Daddy, why do you look scared?" Daniel forced a smile. "I'm not scared, buddy. I just need to make a few calls." But he was scared, terrified. By noon, the rumor had spread. A parent claimed Linda was overstepping boundaries, that she was too involved, that it was unsafe for someone who wasn't officially employed by the school to be teaching children. No. One said abuse out loud. They didn't have to. Linda heard last. Daniel found her in the classroom after school, erasing the board, her movements calm but distant. She already knew. He could see it in her eyes. "They're reviewing my access," she said quietly. "Until then, I'm not allowed on campus." Daniel felt something inside him snap. "This is my fault." "No," she said gently. This is what happens when you make people uncomfortable by doing what's right. Eli stood in the doorway, clutching Mateo's hand. Does this mean she can't come back? Linda knelt in front of them, smiling even as her eyes shone with tears. It just means we wait, okay? Mateo signed frantically, his breathing quickening. Daniel stepped forward, dropping to his knees beside him. He signed slowly, carefully. We will not leave you. Mateo's hands stilled. That night, Mrs. Torres came over for dinner. She sat stiffly at the table, fear etched deep into her face. If they take her away, she whispered, everything falls apart. Daniel shook his head. No, this time we fight. The hearing was scheduled for Friday. Daniel took the day off. So did half the parents in Ellie's class. When Linda walked into the room, she wasn't alone. Children followed her. Parents, teachers. Mrs. Torres held Mateo close. Her chin lifted in quiet defiance. The panel asked questions about credentials, about boundaries, about why a grieving father had entrusted his son to a woman he barely knew. Daniel stood. I almost made the worst mistake of my life because I saw fear instead of truth, he said. This woman didn't harm my child. She saved him. And she saved me. One by one, others spoke. A teacher, a parent. Then Eli. He stood on a chair so they could see him. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. She teaches us how to listen with our eyes, he said. And when people listen, nobody has to be angry. Mateo signed beside him, copying every word. The room was silent when the decision came. Linda stayed, not as a volunteer, as the school's first full-time inclusion coordinator. Mrs. Torres sobbed openly. Eli ran into Linda's arms. Mateo laughed without sound, his joy bursting out of him in wild, beautiful movement. Life didn't become perfect after that. Grief didn't disappear. Mateo still had hard days. Eli still got hurt sometimes. Daniel still struggled with guilt and memory and the quiet ache of loss. But the house felt different. Laughter lived there now. Hands moved through the air at dinner. Silence no longer meant distance. One night, months later, Daniel found Eli asleep on the couch, Mateo's head resting on his shoulder, Linda's blanket tucked around them both. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching, understanding something he had missed for years. Family wasn't built by blood alone. It was built by showing up, by listening, by choosing love when fear would have been easier. Linda met his eyes from across the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Daniel knew now. The most shocking thing that had ever happened to him wasn't walking in and thinking his child was in danger. It was realizing that the person he almost pushed away was the one God had sent to teach him how to see.